Okay, so I just wanted to do a one of the homework problems for you. So this one says, I just wanted to do this with the quadratic formula just to remind you about using the quadratic formula. I believe we did these back in chapter 2. However, in chapter 2, section 2.4 was I counted that for bonus if you remember, but it was dealing with the imaginary numbers. So I just wanted to do a quick example in case you didn't go over that so you could see what the quadratic formula looks like using imaginary numbers. So in this example, we have 25x squared plus 30x plus 13 equals 0. And we're solving for x. So remember the quadratic formula, we need to know what a is. A in this problem is 25. B is 30, and C is 13. So if you remember, our quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so since we've identified our a, b, and c, we're going to have negative 30 plus or minus the square root of 30 squared minus 4 times 25 times 13 all over 2 times 25. Okay, so the determinant remembers what's under the square root sign. Let's go ahead and use our calculator just to simplify that. So we have 30 squared minus 4 times 25. And I'm just using these parentheses for my multiplication. That way, if you had a negative in here, you get in the practice of doing that so you don't mess up your signs there. So we have negative 30 plus or minus the square root of negative 400 all over 50. Now the square root of 400, if you remember, or if you weren't sure, you could do this, second square root 400. Now don't put the negative in there because you're not going to get a real number when you take the square root of a negative. But the square root of negative 1, and this is from that section 2.4, is equal to I. It's called an imaginary number. And this is where we deal with what are called complex numbers. So complex numbers consist of both real and imaginary numbers. So we do have some complex numbers that we're going to deal with in this chapter 5. So we have negative 30 plus or minus. Now the square root of 400 was 20. And then because of this negative, it's going to be plus or minus 20i all over 50. So we can separate this out and write it as negative 30 over 50 plus or minus 20i over 50. So then, of course, these reduce. So we have negative 3/5 plus or minus 2i over 5. Okay, so now the homework has told us if you have two answers, you have to write it as two separate answers. So we have negative 3/5. So first I've used the plus 2i over 5, and then use a comma, and then negative 3/5 minus 2i over 5. Okay, so if you see back up here, it shows enter multiple answers as a list separated by commas. Okay, so I know your problem will have different numbers, but that is what this one looks like.